Hi everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics. This week's questions answered video, how to become an instructor. This is a bit of a complicated question because there's no clear answer and there's no clear path. Being a firearms instructor is something that can either be laid upon you professionally, such as law enforcement or military, or even private security, or it's something that you just have a natural passion for. Knowing how to shoot is literally the first step. Knowing how to shoot does not necessarily mean that you can teach other people how to reach your skill level. And being the best shooter in all disciplines isn't necessarily a requirement. What's more important is actually having an understanding of the process and being able to contextualize that process to the individual student. So the lowest level of education is memorization. I can memorize a teaching point. I can memorize a procedure to instruct on, for an example, say like maximizing efficiency on the reload of a rifle or maximizing efficiency on the reload of a handgun. I can memorize that process. But real teaching comes from, and of course this is just an example, is being able to take something beyond memorization and actually be able to conceptualize and create based on a general guideline. So if I have a student that has issues, such as maybe they're missing a finger, or maybe they're missing many fingers, or maybe they're in a wheelchair, or maybe they have limited use in one of their hands. If I only memorize the technique that I'm teaching, I might not be able to conceptualize and create an alternate method based on that framework in order to get that student to perform to their maximum efficiency. And that's definitely contextual to what we're trying to do. So being an instructor, going back to the point, isn't as simple as knowing how to shoot. You have to be able to look at a field of shooters from class to class to class to class and address their individual concerns as necessary. Teaching is definitely the foundation of instructing. And I know those two words technically mean the same thing. They are synonyms for each other. You break out the thesaurus, they're likely to be in each other's category. But I've always felt that instructing is more of a cafeteria style delivery, as in, here's the line, here are your choices, you're gonna get some of these and that's it. Those are your only options. Whereas teaching to me is more like ordering off the menu. I can add things, I can take away, I can substitute, I can change the delivery of a program based on my audience. And that's the most important part of teaching, is being able to address those individual needs, which I kind of already talked about. But the path to becoming an instructor, as I opened with, isn't as necessarily clear as it would be in some other professions. If you look at doctors, lawyers, other professionals, and granted, I'm not putting them in the same category, I'm just using it as an example. There is a more or less established career path from first level education until residency and then becoming a doctor, or passing the bar and becoming a lawyer, opening your own practice, or going to work for the state, or what have you. With firearms instructors, you don't need any of that. You should have professional training, but you don't need it. You can literally just start an IG, a Facebook page, a YouTube channel, and start doing things and demonstrating things, and then people will probably come to you because if you're demonstrating things proficiently, they'll assume that you can teach them to do those very same things proficiently. And this gets into a bit of the potential for an Annie Oakley kind of situation where you're a very demonstrational instructor. You're great at showing people that your skill set is advanced, but can you teach that skill set? And that's the hardest part, because each student is going to have their own individual drawbacks, their own individual issues, their own individual concerns, and their own individual, I guess, hindrances to being able to adopt the exact same performance level that you have. In firearms, we have metrics that we love to talk about. We love to talk about distance, we love to talk about time, and we love to talk about accuracy, because those are all three measurable metrics that we have in firearms. When you look at self-defense shooting, those metrics don't apply directly to what we're practicing for, because we don't know exactly in what conditions we're going to need to perform in. So your background is contextual to that as well. Someone can have 10, 15, 20 years in the military, but can they relate that experience to a 30-year-old mother of two? Some of the stuff is going to be pretty common sense and transferable, but some of it's not. So people like myself, I have a military background, I have a private security background, and I have a law enforcement background. But more importantly than that, I started my life as a citizen, as a civilian, and I'm more or less these days more citizen than I'm law enforcement, because I'm only reserve at this time, and I've been out of the military for a number of years. So I need to be able to contextualize my peer experiences in the way that I teach. But I also have to remember that the person that I'm instructing isn't necessarily going to use those same skill sets in the same way that I used to, or the same way that I still do. So there has to be an appreciable focus on the student's needs instead of just throwing information out there and being like, well, do whatever you want with it. The word of the day is always going to be context. How do I, as an instructor, facilitate the lesson to the greatest of my ability and make sure that the student understands the information I'm putting down? That requires communication. I've had instructors in the past that all they did was yell at me and kick dirt and scream and talk about time and you're going to die if you don't do this faster, and a bunch of other expletives were thrown. And while that type of instruction may work on some people, it doesn't work on higher functioning people. People who like to think about problem solving versus just performing based on specific criteria. That type of instruction isn't going to be beneficial to them. The more professional you get, the less of that behavior you see from instructors. My personal opinion is if I see someone doing that with no really regard or purpose, I question if they're doing it because they don't know another way to instruct the student or they don't know another way to reach the people. It's not nearly as going to be effective, at least in my opinion, as developing that relationship with your student and saying, okay, I know there's 12 guys here, we're all shooting, but this is your individual concern, this is where I'm seeing your inefficiencies, and this is how to correct them. When I run a class anyway, every single rep on the line, I'm spending time with one student. Throughout the period of a 2-day class, 16 plus hours, everybody's going to get that one-on-one time as needed. Even if it's just me watching them and saying, you did really good, that was good, that positive reinforcement, that's important as well. I've never been in the habit of critiquing for the sake of critiquing. So I think you can see that the process is a little more complicated than just being able to shoot. You have to develop your own brand and your own methodology to teaching, but there's some great programs that are out there that can help. A good stepping stone for credibility, at least in the eyes of potential students, is establishing your teaching credentials through accepted schools or through other instructors or through peers. Just because, and this is, unfortunate, but just because you want to be an instructor doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get to be an instructor. It's very dependent on if you're bringing a quality content and a quality product to the table that people are going to want to learn from. Background is important, but it's not necessary depending on what your focus is. If you want to be an instructor in performance shooting, are you a grandmaster? Have you gone through competition levels and reached that pinnacle of performance to where literally you're going to be teaching competition or mechanical-based shooting, and here's the reason why you should want to learn from me. I have gone to this level of acceleration. On the self-defense side, it's a little more gray. There is no pinnacle necessary. Some people say, oh, well, he was SF, so he can teach me. And that's very true. But is that person actually going to be able to contextualize their special forces experience into going back to that 30-year-old mother of two? Not necessarily, but probably, because those dudes tend to be pretty smart, at least in my experience. Resumes matter, but so does pedigree. So does input, and so does content. If you're going to come up with a way to be an instructor, if it's something that you're super passionate about, then you're going to find a way to reach the people. Because being passionate about instruction is all about wanting to help people. It's not about becoming rich, because you don't get to be rich in this job. You may find yourself in a position where you have sponsors and you get the occasional free rifle or you get swag in the mail like t-shirts and patches, but you can't eat that stuff. And you can't go to a car dealership and trade it all in on like a Ferrari. This job isn't about becoming wealthy. It's about giving back. It's something that you really honestly have to be passionate about. In the days of social media, it seems to be that people are interested in the social aspect of instructing and the social aspect of teaching. And that's not necessarily the right motivation to get into wanting to be doing this. So step one needs to be, obviously, knowing how to shoot. That's like basic level stuff. You shouldn't even want to become an instructor unless you're able to demonstrate that what you're going to teach. But step two is learning how to be a teacher. And that may have literally nothing to do with firearms whatsoever. I've gone through some classes before about teaching to adults, adult learning, dealing with problem students and things like that had absolutely nothing to do with firearms. They had to do with teaching. The skill set of teaching and getting students to understand, invest in, and then conceptualize and be able to create from the knowledge that you give them or the information that you give them doesn't have to be firearm specific. It's literally just taking those skill sets that you learn as a teacher and applying them to what you're trying to teach. So when I took those classes, I was the only gun guy, if you will, in the room. Everybody else was a professional educator, be it, high school, middle school, elementary school, college level teachers, vocational school, welding instructors, things like that. but the teaching skills I gained were priceless. And to me, that's the most important thing, because I'm not interested in creating shooters. I'm interested in creating problem solvers. And teaching problem solving is a little bit more difficult, I think, than teaching someone to shoot that tight group. I need to be able to shoot that tight group, teach them how to shoot that tight group in the problem that they're encountering. And since I'm a very self-defense focused instructor, it's hard for me to conceptualize, or it's actually it would be irresponsible of me to try to predict the situation in which they need to do that. So that goes back to, if you're a problem solver, you're probably going to be able to teach people to problem solve. But the path is not clear. And that's the most complicated thing about answering this question, is there is no royal road, if you will, to becoming a firearms instructor. There are schools out there. There are instructional programs out there. The NRA has one, both on the civilian side, they call it the civilian side, or citizen side, and the law enforcement side. And the law enforcement side training is actually really good. The citizen side is kind of severely watered down, in my opinion. It could definitely use some updating, but it's still a good program. And then the final decision is, do you want to teach inception level firearms? Do you want to teach people from the level of, this is my first gun, I've never shot one before? Or do you want to start off with students who are comfortable with the firearm as far as safety is concerned, but they're more self-defense focused, or they're getting into competition shooting? And of course, you can cover all of those at the same time. Sometimes it's good just to pick a specific focus. The most important lesson I can probably say, or advice I should say, that I can give someone about thinking about becoming a firearms instructor is, do not worship at the altar of gimmicks. Don't try to set yourself apart with something that you created, especially if it's not grounded in reality. 80 to 90% of the stuff that we teach is the same. We just have different approaches and different critiques and slightly different methodologies to it, but the course content is roughly the same from class to class to class to class to class, because there's only so many ways to approach the topic. There may be different small nuances that are different, or different techniques, or a different order of importance in things, but at the end of the day, things remain roughly the same. The instructors that try to set themselves apart on gimmick usually don't fare well in the long run with their peers, or they become ostracized by the community as a whole, because people look at that and say, that's Amway, that's Herbalife, that's not real stuff, that's infomercial training. And you don't necessarily want to find yourself in that category, because it severely limits the quality of the students that you will attract. Like I said, this is a difficult question to answer because there's no guideline, there's no path. So I hope what I've said has been helpful. You have to be passionate about it. And I know that's a tone-deaf phrase. People hear that all the time. People are passionate about all kinds of stuff. But it really has to be something that you believe in, because the one thing that you definitely have to understand, and I'll give this advice to you the same way it was given to me, is you never know how many lives you'll save with what you teach, but you also don't know how many people you may get killed with what you teach. So at all times, and you'll probably lose sleep over it, I know I do occasionally, you have to be critiquing your own program to make sure that you're giving the students absolutely everything you can give them to make them better shooters. I can't really bold, italics, large font underscore that enough. That has to be a primary motivator. Am I giving them everything I have? Is it the best that I can give them? Can I make it better? Do I have to go back and tell people I did it wrong, and now this is the way I do it now, so this is how I think you should think about it now? A lot of this stuff is based in predicting best case scenarios, at least my sake when I talk about self-defense focused instruction. And because of the internet as a thing, we get cyclical about things, and we like to argue our way in circles, and we put one topic away and then we immediately pull it back out and start making memes and jokes and things like that. And that's all good, because that helps us look at things critically over and over and over again, which is beneficial. But sometimes it creates way too much noise for the amount of signal that's coming through, and that's unfortunate. Not to be trite, of course, but you got to believe in yourself and put yourself out there. And if you're not willing to defend that what you're teaching, then you don't believe in it. So if you're going to teach a concept, if you're going to teach a principle, if you're going to teach a methodology and you can't defend it, or you're not willing to defend it, then you have to ask yourself, is this really something I should be doing? Is this really something I should be teaching? You have to have 100% conviction in the things that you're going to teach, the concepts and the principles. But you also have to be willing to admit when you're wrong, because at the end of the day, the lowest common denominator of wrong is your student getting hurt. And that's not something that we want. I'm Aaron Count with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.